I am in Bloomfield, New Mexico at the Salmon Ruins Museum. This is a Chacoan ruin that's over 900 years old. There's a whole museum complex here, so this is going to be really cool. Let's go check this out. This ruin is quite fancy because it has its own museum, so we're going to check that out first. The inside of the museum is shaped like a kiva with a circular skylight at the top. The Salmon ruins, as well as the nearby Aztec ruins, were influenced by the Chaco Canyon peoples who lived about 45 miles south of here, so this site is considered an outlier from the area now known as Chaco Culture National Historical Park. The Chacoans built this site from 1088 to 1090 AD. The pueblo was built with bonito phase masonry styles, similar to the pueblos of Chaco Canyon. These are some Anasazi pot shards and other relics. Some of these may be well over 1,000 years old. Corn was introduced to the region about 800 BC by the Anasazi, and here are some digging sticks for maize cultivation, and they also cultivated beans later on. The people here hunted around the San Juan River. They would hunt and eat deer, rabbits, prairie dogs, gophers, geese, sandhill cranes, and Colorado squawfish from the river. They were a very resourceful people and would use the animal bones as tools, like awls for sewing and basket making, as well as end scrapers. There's a replica at Lattle and a dart blower. These were innovative yet prehistoric ways to kill big game before the bow and arrow around 700 AD. Here are some Puebloan pitchers, jars, and ladles. Here are some more genuine artifacts, like a canteen and an effigy vessel. Those are actually some game pieces. Medicine stones were used to play a game to the rain-making gods. Here are some more original jars and pitchers. This is a display on the trade routes between the pueblos throughout the Southwest. Here are some pottery replicas and some actual shards excavated from the Salmon ruins. They did cotton and loom weaving in the region by 1100. Weaving was actually a predominantly male activity. That is a human hair cord. That's got to be off a person who lived hundreds of years ago. Here's some rather colorful pottery of the Zuni, Hopi, and Rio Grande people. These are chamahilas, or stone hoes. The Anasazi finely quarried these stones that were usually used for altar equipment during the snake dance. Other groups would later use them as symbols for babies. Here are examples of flake stone. The residents at Salmon Pueblo would have had a toolkit of these implements for a variety of purposes. Here's some fake rock art. The Anasazi would carve symbols and or paint in rocks, usually for ceremonial purposes. Along with carving petroglyphs on rock surfaces, some would carve little animals and other shapes during the time of Salmon Pueblo. There's some original turkey bone awls, beads, and whistles. That's a photograph of a macaw skeleton that was discovered in a room at Salmon Pueblo. Macaws were kept inside the pueblo by some families, and because of that, this one probably died because it was malnourished and didn't receive enough sunlight. Shell beads were quite common here, and they were used as bracelets, anklets, earrings, and necklaces. The roof of the pueblo looked like this. It was strong enough for multiple stories to be built on top. However, they were susceptible to fire. It is unknown how many times the pueblo caught on fire, but one time in 1263, about 42 people were killed. I must compliment the displays here. They are very well themed and old-fashioned, several of them complete with the hand paintings on the walls. After the Anasazi, the Diné, or Navajo, occupied this region, and they built some defensive puebloitas, many of which still stand today. This is a model of a little cave crevice where some artifacts are being stored. There's also a ladder similar to the ones built for the cliff dwellings of the region. In the late 19th century, the Salmon family made a homestead on the property. Peter Salmon, who is from Indiana, rediscovered this site and worked to protect it. His preserved homestead is next to the pueblo, and we'll see that too. And here are some relics excavated from around the homestead. Here's some more Puebloan pottery. These are 3 of the original Biaz panels, which were saved from vandalism. And there's a puppy. Well, that was a fantastic exhibit, and now we'll take a look around the rest of the property, including the Salmon ruins and the reconstructed historical village. This scenic overlook has a great view of some of the mountains and mesas to the east, like Angel Peak. One way takes you to the ruins, the other to the Heritage Park. First, let's do the ruins. Visiting these old Puebloan ruins is always fascinating because this is among the oldest preserved human settlements in the United States. This stone was laid by people who lived and walked here over 900 years ago. This is a great example of Chacoan core and veneer masonry. These sandstone blocks were carefully cut by skilled stonemasons, and the surface of these stones looked remarkably smooth before centuries of abandonment. Unshaped rocks and mud were poured into the middle to form the core of the walls. The interior walls were covered with plaster or woven mats. This room has been dubbed by archaeologists as the bowling alley, and all that was discovered here was that an infant was buried under the floor wrapped in a willow mat with a decorated pitcher. The ground floor of this pueblo contained 150 rooms. They were set up in a way that might be referred to as a suite. 4 small rooms were grouped together, and an individual family would occupy those rooms. Here's a kiva. When the Chacoans were here, this would have been a square room, but a later group turned it into a kiva. That was the ventilation system for the kiva. Here's a slightly larger kiva. Again, the Chacoans didn't have it this way. It was changed around 1190. The Chacoans were only here for about a century, as they abandoned the site by 1150. Then the Mesa Verde people from north of here occupied the pueblo for about 50 years after that, and then they abandoned it around 1250. During this time, there was a significant migration towards the Rio Grande Valley, so by 1300 most of the ancestral inhabitants of the Four Corners region had left this village and many of the others. The Chacoans may have had ceremonial purposes for these rooms, especially since they found 2 dead turkeys and 2 dead macaws buried under them, but the later residents used this area for depositing trash. There's a peacock. This makes no sense. Why is there a peacock here? The masonry of all this is very impressive, especially considering how old it is and how it is still intact. This was the earliest room converted into a kiva around 1120. And you can actually walk inside this one. This is pretty cool. In this room, they have some vigas, which were the wood beams to support the roof. There's a preserved stone ladder. This room had ceremonial significance, and there was a small opening at the top to allow a beam of light to enter, just like at the center of the kivas. This big room is important to archaeologists because it best preserved a variety of organic materials and artifacts for whatever reason. This second story room was likely an area where people gathered to socialize and make stone tools. This was likely a typical Chacoan family living unit, and this one had lots of evidence of cooking and food processing. This is the Tower Kiva. It was built in 1088, and the rest of the pueblo was likely built around this room by the Chacoans. Of course, it was much taller back then. It was probably about 3 stories, and there was a hearth at the center of this ceremonial center, and the remains can still be seen of it. One would have to climb a ladder to get in or out of the Tower Kiva. The Chacoans butchered wild game in these rooms. Here's another one of the converted small kivas. When the last peoples left the pueblo in the 1280s, much of this pueblo was intentionally burned, including the Tower Kiva. This is the Great Kiva, slightly separated from the rest of the pueblo. Most ceremonial, religious, and political gatherings would have taken place right in this chamber by the Chacoan residents. At its peak in the Chacoan era, 200 to 300 people lived at this community, and it's truly amazing to walk in their footsteps and see where they lived almost a millennia later. Now over in the Heritage Park, they have some reconstructed dwellings. This is the original Salmon homestead. The Salmons were among the first white American homesteaders in northwestern New Mexico. The family did do some excavation work, and when they moved out in the 1960s, they ensured that this site would be preserved and open to the public. This is the interior of the home. It wasn't open to go in, but that's what the pioneer conditions looked like in the late 19th century. This was the root cellar of the Salmons, used to preserve foods through the summer and winter, or to store beer and wine. Not sure what they used it for. These are some old bunkhouses, which display the truly rustic conditions of the white pioneers of the region. Here's a fake pueblo in ruin. Not all that impressive since we just saw a bunch of real ones. They have a replica open-air kiva, and there are some reconstructed dwellings, and the museum is on top of the hill there. There's a ramada for branches and plants. Nothing growing on it right now because it's December and it's freaking cold. This is a replica sweat lodge, built originally for purification ceremonies that got you really sweaty. This is a Navajo hogan, which shows what a traditional Navajo dwelling looks like. Some people in the region actually still live in these, but they're generally used for ceremonial purposes at this point. There's some fake petroglyphs, though you can find some real ones in the region. This is a forked stick hogan, a style using a different construction method. While teepees were generally used by the Plains Indians, hogans were built in that fork stick style as we just saw, so they were kind of similar. This is a waffle garden. Pretty sure you can't grow waffles in the desert. And this appears to be a larger sweat lodge structure that you can go inside of. The Salmon ruins is probably the most immersive of the Dinétah ruins because of the museum, homestead, and these replicas. This is apparently an Ice Age pond. As you can see, there's a woolly mammoth over there, except there's not any water. And here's a replica pioneer trading post. So this is a really good stop to see this place kind of in the reconstruction phase, not really like, fully developed or anything, but the museum was high quality. Everything here was pretty good, so I feel like this video, I've been to a bunch of other Puebloan sites and all sorts of stuff across the country, so please go check those videos out, and thanks for watching.